Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about my search for Tom the Futurist, who was curiously absent from our Mars welcome dinner and was off exploring the Martian ruins that weren't really Martian. Now, I had known Tom for a while, and I knew he wouldn't miss a good dinner unless something very pressing had come up. Also, it wasn't like him to be impolite and not greet us when we came all this way from Earth. I was curious and even a little concerned that something had happened to him. But King Targon didn't seem to think anything was wrong with Tom's ill-timed exploration of the ruins and chalked his absence up to just losing track of time, which can be difficult to keep track of in space. I understand that. Now, as you remember from last time, we had landed on Mars and were treated to an amazing Martian welcome dinner, as was part of their custom. Jillian helped with the preparations, and it was quite the intergalactic cooperative meal. I sat next to my son Patrick, of course, so we could catch up more over dinner. While the dinner conversation had to remain light, which was also Martian custom, we had much to do and discuss once dinner had concluded. Janet, our mission specialist, along with Patrick, were eager to discuss a terraforming agreement, and we had to find Tom the Futurist, who was off exploring the ruins. These things were all connected, but I wasn't sure how, and I also had to find out why Tom had personally requested me on this mission. It didn't quite fit together just yet. At least we had dealt with the sentient meteor storm, for now, and allowed the John Carter to land, which was the ship carrying my son, that we were also sent to find. So, one Martian mystery down, and a fair amount still to go. The delicious dinner had put everyone in good spirits, so I was confident with this talented crew we'd get to the bottom of things. There was no time to lose, and I wanted to get out to the ruins right away to see if I could find my friend Tom the Futurist, who was, incidentally, also actually from the future. And I will tell you all about the ruins, my search, and what I found, which caught me off guard, in a moment. But first, I need to tell you about a few things. I want to mention again the note about our stories. They are designed for you to drift in and out of, and while yes, I do like to tell you a full story every episode, drifting in and out or falling completely asleep is factored into the equation. You can pick things up anywhere. That's why I do the story recaps at the beginning. And if you're here, awake, hanging on every word, well, we try to add additional flourishes and flavor in there just for you. So, by all means, enjoy the show any way you wish. It's designed that way. No rules and no pressure, adventurers. I'd also like to nudge you to rate the show with a bunch of stars. Reviews are great too. It's always nice to hear pleasant things about what we're doing over here. And this is also very important. Don't forget to tell your friends directly about the show and post about it wherever you post about things. The more adventurers, the merrier. Now, before I mention the White Cat Adventures Club, I want to remind you that we've created a Science and Adventure Helper donation link on the homepage. So just go to whitecatentertainment.com and click Donate for a one-time donation. Then you can do it whenever you like for whatever you like. But if you do want more, there's the White Cat Adventurers Club. How about early access and ad-free listening to all the shows and an exclusive look at my very irregular journal? Science and exploring is expensive, and your support helps make it happen. And for just $5 a month, you can show your support for the show. There are different tiers and different rewards, including an exclusive t-shirt. Please go to patreon.com/whitecatentertainment and enjoy the access your way. All right, let's get back to the story. As you remember from last time, now that our lovely Martian welcome dinner was over, we were all in the drawing room, and Janet wasted no time in opening up the discussion about terraforming and a licensing agreement with Earth. Patrick jumped in strategically, and I could tell they had both rehearsed this pitch, as it sounded quite professional and polished. King Targon, however, was playing it very coyly and often said that final decisions would be made by the Martian Parliament, but that he most certainly had some influence there. Every once in a while, Janet made a reference to tachyons, which got my attention. There should not be a temporal component to terraforming, and I was beginning to see that there was more to Janet's mission specialization than just terraforming. Since my friend Tom the Futurist was also a time traveler, I was starting to think Janet knew more about things than she initially let on. But Tom, however, was missing, and at that point I thought it was high time we went out to find him. I mentioned to the king I wished to go explore the ruins when there was a break in the negotiations. He said that was fine and brought Bradley and I Martian spacesuits, which are more advanced and, if I'm being honest, more comfortable than NASA's. Dolores was still guarding the journeyman until Barry and Kara returned, although I knew she would insist on coming with us. But I made the call to get going right away. I didn't want to wait anymore in the off chance that Tom may need assistance. Plus, I was sure we'd be fine. I called an informal meeting of both crews in the drawing room. Everyone was well fed and had a chance to relax a little, so now it was time to get to work. Bradley and I would go and explore the ruins. Mission Specialist Janet and my son Patrick would stay and continue to negotiate the terraforming agreement with King Targon and the Martian Parliament. Jillian would stay and assist the Martian chefs for the upcoming crew meals. There was a lot of people to cook for from 2 different planets. Flight Commander Barry and the flight engineers from both crews, Kara and Brian with a Y, would work on our sentient meteor storm problem for when it was time to depart. The linguists, Stephen, not Steve, and Daryl with a Y, would learn more about Martian history and culture, and were offered a private guided tour of the Martian archives. Now, since everyone was well and healthy, there was not much for our medic to do. As I said before on Adventures, better to have a medic and not need one than to not have a medic and then need one. So, our medic Aaron asked for some time off to go hunting with some of the other Martian hunters. What they were hunting, I had no idea, but as long as a medic wasn't needed, I saw no harm in giving him a little time off to keep himself occupied. Bradley and I changed into our Martian spacesuits, and our Martian guide and emissary, Aklak, took us to a different access elevator, presumably one closer to the ruins. He said he wouldn't be going with us, but also added that you can't miss them. I asked him what he thought about them, and Aklak got quiet for a moment and said it would be best if we just saw them for ourselves. We entered the access elevator and heard a low hum as we started the journey back to the surface of Mars. I asked Bradley how things were going with Dolores, and he beamed. He said things couldn't be better, and she was handling space travel well. We were all worried about her and her astrophobia, but she was making a concentrated effort to keep it under control. She said the NASA mental health modules helped, but it was Bradley's support that really made the difference. I also asked Bradley himself how he was doing. Going into space can be challenging for a lab assistant, but then again, he's already traveled through time and found secret islands and pirate treasure, so he was a bit more savvy than other assistants. Bradley smiled again and thanked me for the consideration, said he was doing fine, and added that there was no place he'd rather be. He will make an absolutely fantastic scientist and explorer someday. It will be bittersweet when he strikes out on his own and finds his own assistant, but thankfully, that was still a ways away. There was still much I could teach him, and still a lot he could learn. I want him as prepared as possible for his own journeys. The elevator began slowing down and we exited the hidden access hatch. The surface of Mars greeted us once again, and the barren landscape had its own beauty, and we were once again in awe of what we saw. Sure, we've all seen pictures from the Mars rover, but I'm telling you, they don't do the majesty of Mars justice. Granted, we were here to make a terraforming agreement, but still, there was natural beauty here that could and should be preserved, even with terraforming. King Targon had said the ruins were straight ahead and we couldn't miss them, just like Akhlak had said. There was a ridge in front of us blocking our visibility on what lay beyond, so Bradley and I started walking on the Martian landscape. I know it may sound odd, but there is something very calming about walking on the surface of another planet. First of all, it's quiet. There's no noise or light pollution. Well, there's no pollution at all. And you get the sense you're not only doing something not many people get to do, but that you're part of something larger in a cosmic sense. When you're out in the vastness of space, walking on another planet, you gain a perspective few people have, and you instantly appreciate it. Bradley felt the same sense of awe, and we continued walking. It took a bit more time, and it was slower going in Martian gravity, but the Martian spacesuits made up for it, and it was comfortable and we were walking at a good clip, all things considered. Before we knew it, we were at the top of the ridge and looked out over the Martian landscape. The ruins were indeed in front of us, at the bottom of a shallow valley. I'll admit there was something off about them, but as we were still far away, what it was, I couldn't put my finger on it just yet. Bradley and I continued on down the other side of the ridge and slowly approached the ruins. As we got closer, things were coming into focus, and when we were close enough, the view of the ruins and what they represented stopped us in our tracks. Suffice it to say, when Bradley and I arrived at the ruins, we were not prepared for what we saw. And then I realized why they were unmistakably not Martian. There was no question they were not Martian. Bradley took it all in, and then commented that these so-called Martian ruins looked quite familiar. But they only would have been familiar to Bradley, myself, and one other person. It was becoming clearer and clearer why Tom had requested me now. Bradley and I looked at each other and then back at the ruins and saw what looked very much like an incomplete Mars-themed roller coaster. We continued to look at the so-called ruins and also saw a Ferris wheel, a log flume, and what looked like snack stands that would eventually sell popcorn, cotton candy, and roasted peanuts. Everything was incomplete and in the middle of construction, but there was not a soul to be found. Bradley and I began to put things together. Tom, the Futurist, was also the manager of the Time City Resort in the Paleozoic era I had stumbled across after my time anchor malfunction and I became lost in time. But this amusement park looked different, and also I began to grow a little concerned, as it still seemed like Tom was nowhere to be found. We began exploring the half-finished amusement park and looked for Tom. The park was definitely not a ruin, but we could see why it may be mistaken for one. Everything was half-built, so it looked like it was crumbling. So what happened? And why the heck was it here? And where was Tom? We looked behind a pirate ship's wing and under the half-built tilt-a-whirl and still could not find Tom. Suddenly, a glowing, ethereal figure shifted in the light in front of us. It spoke, and I heard an ethereal voice saying, "I knew you'd get here, my friend." But the figure was translucent, blurry, and see-through, and not at all solid. Now, I'll admit, seeing what looked like a ghost in the middle of a half-built amusement park on the surface of Mars was a little disconcerting. It was clearly Tom, but there was something very wrong. I called Bradley over, who was examining the bumper cars, and he immediately stopped when he saw the indistinct, glowing figure. Bradley looked at me, and I nodded. This was indeed Tom, but not quite. Tom spoke again and explained the situation as best he could, considering his state. Tom's time anchor had malfunctioned, and he was out of temporal phase. He had accidentally gotten caught in a temporal phase shift and was trapped in a time loop, for lack of a better term. That's why he told King Targon to request me for the Mars mission. I mean, honestly, I was a little irritated with King Targon, who hadn't mentioned this, which seemed like it was surely important enough to have been mentioned, but Tom said not to be angry with the Martian ruler. Tom said he had requested that King Targon not tell me about this issue, as he wanted us all to have a nice dinner, and when you're stuck out of temporal phase and in time out of time, it's really all the same, and an hour or two or even a year or two isn't going to make much of a difference. Still, while I appreciated the sentiment, I would have gotten here earlier had I known. This was not good, and I immediately began formulating plans in my head to help Tom get unstuck in time and phase shift back to normal. Bradley, Tom, and I began discussing theories and possibilities, and we started talking about the broad strokes of the problem before we got into the specifics of a proposed solution. While technically not a temporal paradox, Tom's problems indeed shared some similarities with these temporal paradoxical conditions. You see, a temporal paradox, time paradox, or time travel paradox is a paradox, an apparent contradiction or logical contradiction associated with the idea of time travel or other foreknowledge of the future. While the notion of time travel to the future complies with the current understanding of physics via relativistic time dilation, temporal paradoxes arise from circumstances involving hypothetical time travel to the past and are often used to demonstrate its impossibility. You know, obviously, again, this is the forward-facing information. It's clearly not impossible. Temporal paradoxes fall into three broad groups: bootstrap paradoxes, consistency paradoxes, and Newcomb's paradox. Bootstrap paradoxes violate causality by allowing future events to influence the past and cause themselves, or bootstrapping, which derives from the idiom to pull oneself up by one's bootstraps. Consistency paradoxes, on the other hand, are those where future events influence the past can cause an apparent contradiction. Newcomb's paradox stems from the apparent contradictions that stem from the assumptions of both free will and foreknowledge of future events. All of these are sometimes referred to individually as causal loops. The term time loop is sometimes referred to as a causal loop, but although they appear similar, causal loops are unchanging and self-originating, whereas time loops are constantly resetting. Tom was trapped in something similar to a causal loop, as it was unchanging and self-originating, but because he was out of temporal phase, there were some differences and a few more complications. Newcomb's paradox is a thought experiment showing an apparent contradiction between the expected utility principle and the strategic dominance principle. The thought experiment is often extended to explore causality and free will by allowing for perfect predictors. If perfect predictors of the future exist, for example, if time travel exists as a mechanism for making perfect predictions, then perfect predictions appear to contradict free will because decisions apparently made with free will are already known to the perfect predictor. Predestination does not necessarily involve a supernatural power and could be the result of other infallible foreknowledge mechanisms. Problems arising from infallibility and influencing the future are explored in Newcomb's paradox. Even without knowing whether time travel to the past is physically possible, it is possible to show using modal logic that changing the past results in a logical contradiction. If it is necessarily true that the past happened in a certain way, then it is false and impossible for the past to have occurred in any other way. A time traveler would not be able to change the past from the way it is. They They would only act in a way that is already consistent with what necessarily happened. Now, obviously, there's a fair amount of debate on this. Consideration of the grandfather paradox has led some to the idea that time travel is by its very nature paradoxical and therefore logically impossible. For example, the philosopher Bradley Dowden made this sort of argument in the textbook Logical Reasoning, arguing that the possibility of creating a contradiction rules out time travel to the past entirely. However, some philosophers and scientists believe that time travel into the past need not be logically impossible, provided that there is no possibility of changing the past, as suggested, by example, by the Novikov self-consistency principle. Dowden actually revised his view after being convinced of this in an exchange with the philosopher Norman Schwartz. I'll give Dowden a lot of credit here. It's not often you can get a philosopher to change his or her mind. They're like scholars, but with critical thinking skills, and unlike scholars, they usually have something interesting to say. Now, Tom and I often had these discussions about time travel, and it was when he was coy with his answers that I began to grow suspicious of his true origins. Futurists are all confident, sure of themselves loudmouths, but when I met a futurist who was more reserved, it was a sign that he actually knew what he was talking about. So I began paying closer attention to what he said, and more importantly, what he didn't say. Back then, when I confronted him about his true origins, Tom smiled and then just laughed and admitted it, and said he knew he couldn't fool me for that long, but it was fun while it lasted. We became fast friends after that, and I have to say I missed him when he went back to the future to run the Time City Resort in the distant past. Anyway, one of the things we discussed was the consideration of the possibility of backward time travel in a hypothetical universe, described by a Gödel metric created by famed logician Kurt Gödel, to assert that time might itself be a sort of illusion. He suggests something along the lines of the block time view, in which time is just another dimension like space, with all events at all times being fixed within this four-dimensional block. Sergei Krasnikov writes that these bootstrap paradoxes, information or an object looping through time, are the same. The primary apparent paradox is a physical system evolving into a state in a way that is not governed by its laws. He does not find these paradoxical attributes problems regarding the validity of time travel to other factors in the interpretation of general relativity. In a 1992 paper by physicists Andrei Losev and Igor Novikov labeled such items without origin as jinn, the similar term genie. This terminology was inspired by the jinn of the Quran, which are described as leaving no trace when they disappear. Losev and Novikov allow the term jinn to cover both objects and information with a reflexive origin. They call the former jinn of the first kind and the latter jinn of the second kind. They point out that an object making circular passage through time must be identical whenever it is brought back to the past, otherwise it would create an inconsistency. The second law of thermodynamics seems to require that the object tends to lower its energy state throughout its history, and such objects that are identical in repeating points in their history seem to contradict this. But Losev and Novikov argue that since the second law only requires entropy to increase in closed systems, a genie could interact with its environment in such a way as to regain lost entropy. They emphasize that there is no strict difference between jinn of the first and second kind. Krasnikov equivocates between jinn, self-sufficient loops, and self-existing objects, calling them lions, or looping or intruding objects, and asserts that they are no less physical than conventional objects, which, after all, he says, could appear only from either infinity or a singularity. The self-consistency principle developed by Igor Novikov expresses one view as to how backward time travel would be possible without the generation of paradoxes. According to this hypothesis, even though general relativity permits some exact solutions that allow for time travel that contain closed, time-like curves that lead back to the same point in space-time, physics in or near closed time-like curves, or time machines, can only be consistent with the universal laws of physics, and thus only self-consistent events can occur. anything a time traveler does in the past must have been part of the history all along, and the time traveler can never do anything to prevent the trip back in time from happening, since this would represent an inconsistency. The authors concluded that time travel need not lead to unresolvable paradoxes, regardless of what type of object was sent to the past. Physicist Joseph Polchinski considered a potential paradoxical situation involving a billiard ball that is fired into a wormhole at just the right angle such that it will be sent back in time and collides with its earlier self, knocking it off course, which would stop it from entering the wormhole in the first place. Kip Thorne referred to this problem as Polchinski's paradox. Thorne and two of his students at Caltech went on to find a solution that avoided any inconsistencies and found that there was more than one self-consistent solution, with slightly different angles for the glancing blow in each case. Later analysis by Thorne and Robert Forward showed that for certain initial trajectories of the billiard ball, there could be an infinite number of self-consistent solutions. It is plausible that there exist self-consistent extensions for every possible initial trajectory, although this has clearly not been proven. The lack of constraints on initial conditions only applies to spacetime outside of the chronology-violating region of spacetime. The constraints on the chronology-violating region might prove to be paradoxical, but this is not yet known. Well, to them. Novikov's views are not widely accepted. Visser views causal loops and Novikov's self-consistency principle as an ad hoc solution, and supposes that there are far more damaging implications of time travel. Krasnikov similarly finds no inherent fault in causal loops, but finds other problems with time travel in general relativity. Some physicists suggest that causal loops only exist on the quantum scale. Another conjecture, the cosmic censorship hypothesis, suggests that every closed time-like curve passes through an event horizon, which prevents such causal loops from being observed. So, as usual, there's no consensus among scientists when it comes to theoretical conjecture. No surprise there. But theoretical scientific disagreements didn't really matter all that much when I had a time-traveling friend in front of me who required assistance. I had to get Tom unstuck in time, and then he could tell me what the heck a half-built amusement park was doing on the surface of Mars. And I will tell you all about it next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. The truth is, not everyone can time travel, and it's probably better that way, believe me. Without getting into the issues of time paradoxes and causal loops, overall it's best if most people just stay put in their own time. I mean, there's plenty of things to do in your own time, so most people find something that interests them eventually. I suppose that's where the lesson is. Are you using time in your own time as usefully and efficiently as possible? Most of the time, with the use of time, the answer is no. We dream about how things should be and could be, and sometimes we even picture alternate dimensions where we're winning Nobel Prizes or joining a folk band. But the truth is, time itself doesn't really care what we do with it. It gives us a certain amount and then goes off on its business. So use the time you're given, and use it well. But don't put too much pressure on yourself either. It's not like you should be keeping up with the time-traveling Joneses. It's not a competition. It's a journey. Good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.